Welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, the show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. If you're looking for a podcast to keep you informed and ahead of the game in business, the GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Hello, and welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Paula DuPont, and today we have a number of topics to discuss, the biggest one being about Congress passing the latest stimulus package that's aimed at helping small businesses, particularly those who weren't able to take advantage of the previous loan program, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. We're also going to talk about the hospital industries trying to get back on their feet, unemployment, and a little bit of controversy or controversial opinions about whether or not the payroll protection program really does help with our overall economy in terms of unemployment. We're going to talk about testing and tracking, which are big topics when it comes to looking at reopening different states and businesses. And we're also going to talk about drones and their role, their possible role in combating the coronavirus and tracking. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the latest package that was approved or voted for by Congress. It seems every time I do this podcast, there is another update. Either it's about the program to begin with, the initial one that was rolled out the beginning of April, and then further updates about it being depleted, at least in terms of the payroll protection program. And then other controversy that's come out about it, about who has been able to take advantage of the loans and who's been left out. So today, it's good news. It's Congress, as I said, has passed the latest bill, which is $484 billion in stimulus aid. $320 billion of it will be specifically towards the payroll protection program. Now, the bill still has to be signed by the president, who has said publicly that he would sign it when it got to that point. But basically, you have both parties agreeing to this. And in fact, I believe the vote was pretty overwhelmingly yes. It was like 388 to 5 in favor of passing the legislation. So this package, they actually started talking about this back when they were already implementing the first stimulus package that provided several $billion as well to helping small businesses, airline industry, states. There were a number of targets for that. But consequently, within 2 weeks' time, the money ran out in terms of small businesses being able to get loans. There was criticism about the lack of definition around who could take advantage of it. You know, the common language that was used was that it was aimed at small businesses. However, because of the way it was written, where it said companies had to use the money, they're basically loans that would be forgiven as long as the money was used to compensate employees and keep them on payroll at least until, I believe, October. And and that they have no more than 500 employees. Well, evidently, because of the loopholes in that, there were several large corporations that were able to secure loans from that. And, there's been debate about how they could do that, and they justified it because of going through different subsidiaries or different companies set up where they would have 500 or less employees, or at least those would be the ones who would benefit from the loan. And you had companies like Shake Shack that got a $10 million loan, but after all of the controversy and criticism, they had decided to give back their loan. Well, even before this recent loan package being approved, which was today, as I said, from Congress, Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of the Treasury, had advised companies who had participated in the program. He had advised them, I believe, on Tuesday to give the money back. Basically, if you were a publicly held company and you basically have other means of liquidity or getting money, that money should be turned back to the program to enable other small businesses who don't obviously have that kind of resource to tap, for them to be able to take advantage of it. So in the wake of that, there have been companies who've come forward, some maybe just ahead of his advice or his commandment about that. Ruth's Chris, which actually I had reported on in a previous podcast as being one of the companies who was able to get $20 million in loans. And by the way, companies were, the ceiling was $10 million in loans per loan. But companies like Ruth's Chris that have an operating company and then another company, I forget what they called that, but all under the bigger umbrella, for both companies, they were able to get $10 million apiece. They have since said that they would return that money because they could get their liquidity elsewhere. And so that's why they would do it. As I said, there have been other companies as well who have said that they would give the money back. So either way, you're not seeing a big battle for those companies to hold on to the money. I think there is a recognition in the face of all of the small businesses that were turned away when the account dried up just within 2 weeks' time. So there's obviously a tremendous need out there, and no lack of companies to take advantage of this. So now I believe small businesses that are looking to get a loan and may have already applied through the last program, I believe they're being told they don't have to apply again because their initial application would be considered for this next round. But for those companies that are finding that they have to return the money, the Treasury has said that they need to give it back by May 7th. So, and as I said, in terms of others who have gotten loans, they won't have to return the money provided that they do use it to compensate their employees or rehire them if they have in fact already let them go. So that's encouraging news. And also one other thing, evidently, or at least prior to today's passing of the legislation, I believe there was $60 billion carved out of that to go to small banks so that they could in turn approve loans at that level. So overall, it looks like it should be pretty beneficial for small businesses. Hopefully, it will get to cover the others that need it. There's a feeling among some that there will never be enough, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I think if they need to go back for more money, it might take a little longer to get it. just because Congress was wrangling enough for passing this one, and I believe, with future bills, there may be a little more scrutiny in how it's administered to make sure that it really is getting to where it needs to go. So we're going to take a brief commercial break, and we'll be back.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking for a podcast that gives you all of the latest news from the world of finance? Then check out the GSMC Financial News Podcast. We'll delve into the ups and downs of the stock market, changes in the economy, and news from the world of real estate and technology. From breaking news on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or the overseas market, to updates on the bond market, if there's money to be made, we'll cover it on the GSMC Financial News Podcast.
Hi, I'm back. So in the last segment, I was talking about the recently passed legislation from Congress around providing additional payroll protection program monies to help with small businesses. The original PPP program had also carved out, I believe, about $70 billion for relief for the nation's health system, for hospitals and other related health companies. And also as part of that package was some funding that enabled hospitals to be covered for uninsured patients who were being treated for coronavirus. So there was, some help right off the bat to address hospitals in particular who have to quickly shift the way that they did business to focus around COVID. And of course, in that process, they had to shut down elective surgeries and really any other non-essential needs of going to the hospital. Of course, I'm not really sure what non-essential reason you'd go to a hospital, maybe for the food, haha. All right, that's probably not a really good joke, but in any case, I think we can all agree that if you're going to the hospital, it must be something that really needs attention. And we've had to reprioritize what that looks like given this crisis that we're in. Still, because of that, because the fact that now hospitals have been overwhelmed and treating COVID patients now for well over a month, and in some places, they're overwhelmed in hard hit areas. You have rural areas and institutions that may not be seeing as much activity, and at the same time had shut down elective procedures, in order for safety reasons for both staff and for the patients. So now you're seeing that as states start looking at reopening, you have also the hospitals saying, well, in some cases, I think it's better that we do elective surgeries, and we can, in fact, do them. Tenet Healthcare Corporation is one of the companies that is restarting some surgeries in Texas. And also HCA Healthcare, Inc., which is a national hospital chain, had said that it expects to reopen across its 43 markets by the end of June. And, a lot of the kinds of things that they will be doing or have done are those things, obviously, that were put off, like some diagnostic imaging, some surgeries like for gallbladders and addressing gallbladders and other similar type procedures. The outpatient procedures, they're a growing source of revenue and typically more profitable than treating critically ill. So, that's kind of, we don't want to look at that because right now it's all hands on deck and let's deal with the crisis and people who are dying and keep them from dying if we can. So obviously that's been the bigger priority over profit, way over profit. But, at the end of the day, in some places where they're not dealing with that sort of situation, but they're shut down, it makes sense that they might be able to open for that. I think everyone would agree you want to make sure it's going to be safe to go into the hospital setting and that the operating rooms are beyond the measures of health and safety that they were before. So there has to be a lot of reassurances in place for people. But given that that's being addressed, it makes sense that some of these things would be done. And, it's made me wonder as well, are there other critical health issues that are not being addressed right now because of the messages that the hospital community is focused on COVID, as it should be, but people may hesitate to address things that they might be experiencing, which would ordinarily demand some sort of attention. Certain, rashes or sprains or something that maybe doesn't seem immediately life-threatening, like, chest pain or something that would indicate a heart attack. But nonetheless, that could be signs of, infection or cancer, other issues that may be arising right now that we're not going to know about, but maybe we'll find out in a couple months' time. We'll find out all these statistics because people were too afraid to address them right now. And we were also discouraging it as a society to deal with more serious things. So just to loop back to the stimulus aid to help hospitals and what that's going to look like, I touched on that in the beginning. And how it would break down that $70 billion is that $20 billion more would go to providers based on their recent revenues and $10 billion for hospitals in areas hard hit by the virus, as well as $10 billion for roughly 2,000 rural hospitals and health clinics. This is, by the way, according to a Wall Street Journal article that has this breakdown in it. Providers that have already received disbursements of $30 billion from the stimulus package will draw from an additional $20 billion based on 2018 net revenue. So hopefully this amount of money will help a lot of these hospitals and providers be able to, make it through. We know that we're always going to need them. That need is not going to lessen. Hopefully the need around coronavirus aid or treatment will lessen. I mean, that's the goal. But in terms of the rest of healthcare, I think certainly we will come away from this with a greater appreciation of what they do and the dedication that goes beyond the dollars and the profits that, is something somebody's worrying about somewhere. But it's obviously not the people on the front line who are doing the work and spending all kinds of crazy time doing it. So that's that story, talking about the hospitals. And, I think a lot of us are very happy that there is going to be some help for them. And if there is going to be any federal money given out to help businesses, that would be a big one. So we're going to break again for another commercial. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the unfortunate new unemployment numbers that came out this week for last week's totals, and kind of share a couple perspectives on that whole issue of unemployment. So we'll talk when I get back.
I want to talk to you guys about this amazing product I've been using lately called Hydrant. If you're like me and you want to kick the coffee habit, but you're worried about your energy levels depleting, to avoid the morning sluggishness and that midday slump, you need to make sure you're hydrated. It's super important. And that's where I've been using Hydrant. And for 25% off your first order, you can go to drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC at checkout. Hydrant is basically flavored electrolyte packets you mix directly into your water to make hydrating your body easy and delicious. And what I love about Hydrant, it's backed by research. The formula was developed by Oxford scientists to provide perfectly balanced, efficient hydration. Again, that's drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC for 25% off your first order. Another really cool thing about Hydrant, there's no synthetic colors or artificial sweeteners. The formula is vegan and you can choose between 3 different flavors or a variety pack. So for all my vegan friendly fellows out there, this one's for you. Again, this is drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Hi, I'm back. So every Thursday, the government comes out with the new jobless numbers based on who's filed for unemployment in the previous week. So this week, the numbers came out and they continue to be dismal, as we've expected them to be. We're not through April yet, and in fact, so next week we'll have this week's numbers. And then in another week after that, we'll finally have the rest for April, for all of April, which is projected to be worse than what March was. But basically, with the numbers that came out this week, 4.4 million more people filed for unemployment last week. And that brings a total of the number of unemployed since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic here to 26 million people. So, you know, the good news, if there is any good news in that, is that there is unemployment available at the state level for anyone who applies and meets the criteria. And there is the additional $600 a week from the federal government to augment the state payment. So in a lot of states where unemployment might be roughly about half of what you make, and of course this does vary by state. You're not going to get 100% of what you made before, but so it's a percentage, and typically it's around half. So you figure whatever that is, you get the additional $600 a week. So that's the good news. The not great news is that some people are still having trouble getting through to the system. With that many millions of people applying for unemployment, the systems are not are able to handle that amount of traffic. So there have been issues in getting through and getting set up with it, and in some places there's a backlog of payments that are yet to go out. But they'll eventually get out, and all those, again, who are eligible will get their money, and retroactive to the point that they first applied. But, you know, it's never good news to be out of a job, regardless if you have supplemental income in the meantime. And, you know, there's always different points of view, and unfortunately a lot of times they fall around party lines, and I'm in no way expressing, you know, an opinion or deference to any party. But I will say that there are those who are critical of the federal government's $600 payment as part of the compensation. And that, by the way, came out of the first stimulus package, that additional $600. And that's also, that is being paid through the end of July at this point. Now, it could possibly be extended beyond that, but at this point, that's the vision for it. Recently, there was a company that put out an opinion column about the fact that as a company, they help to staff and manage restaurants, and that with the unemployment amount that people are receiving, those from the restaurant industry, it de-incentivizes, I'm not sure if that's the way you say it, for them to come back to work should they be offered to come back to their jobs. And they gave an example. This is an Portland, Oregon company, and they gave an example saying that a typical line cook would make $640 a week, and that in Oregon, that would mean that their unemployment payment would be about $416 per week. So in that case, you know, Oregon pays more than half. But then you figure the person gets another $600 a week, so bringing their weekly income to $1,016. And the argument there is that who's going to want to come back to work if you can make more on unemployment, and you're guaranteed to get it through at least the end of July, and that it makes it difficult for restaurant companies like theirs to try to get people to come back to work. And I get what they're saying, but I think that there's a lack of understanding of what it really means to be unemployed, and unemployed at this time. And I just think that there's a couple things to consider here. For one, safety. You know, when do they want workers to come back? And is it at a time when we're not ready yet? I mean, obviously right now we're not ready. Are we going to be ready in a week or two? I'm not sure how it is in Oregon, but You know, it may be more than the money that would keep people from wanting to rush back to a job right now, the safety factor. The other thing is that in a lot of states, restaurants are only open for takeout and delivery. So, you know, will they have work to do if they go back? You know, if the restaurant can only have so many back to support takeout and delivery. Another thing is if a worker has benefits through their employer, and some don't, but if they do, why wouldn't they want to go back for that? I mean, that counts as something as well. Another thing is, and I think this might be more of a consideration, is that we know that the restaurant industry in general and hospitality has been hit probably the hardest of all those. You know, you could argue different ways, the travel industry, other industries, but it's largely believed that the restaurant industry has taken the biggest hit, the workers there. Well, if there's that many unemployed, that means there's that much more competition. And I would have to think that someone who's looking at income from unemployment lasting, you know, possibly till the end of July versus a job that someone else, 3 other people might want, and it's offered to them, they may opt for going back to the job that they know that they have because, again, there's more competition for it. I think that another thing to consider is that I just wonder how many restaurants will still be coming back despite this aid that's available. The sad truth is probably a lot of restaurants won't be able to take advantage of it. And not a lot of the smaller ones are going to survive and be able to come back, sadly. So those are just some things to consider. I think the bigger message here is one it's probably not popular, and I know that there's a lot of business reasons why this isn't so already, but why doesn't the restaurant industry look at paying restaurant staff a little bit more, finding another way of doing it, or maybe helping come up with a way that does better than tips for the employees, or assures them a certain amount of tips or something. I don't really know what the solution is, but if pay is that low, and that, you know, the lure of a job doesn't get them back, I think we have a bigger issue to consider. Well, I'll get off my soapbox on that one. In any case, we're going to take another commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about reopening and the possibility of the second wave.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hi, I'm back. And as I mentioned in this segment, I want to talk about the reopening of states and businesses and the possibility of a second wave of the coronavirus pandemic. And it seemed like a good segue because in the last segment, we talked about unemployment and people going back to work and more competition for work. And so naturally, and I talked about perhaps some reluctance on the part of people returning to work because of safety conditions and wanting some assurances there. So I thought it would be a good transition talking about reopening business in general. And by now, everyone's heard there are some states that are actually reopening at least parts of their economies. There's one, I believe, that's even opening tomorrow or the end of this week. And I've seen people interviewed, business owners and others, asked how they're going to handle business now when they reopen. And I saw a couple people reacting like characters in a movie, one of these suspense movies, or almost like, the Scooby-Doo. I'm very intellectual making that reference, where there's always somebody saying, I don't think that's a good idea, like we're going to go forward, but, we're really not sure that we are really buying this, that this is going to work. And it does make you wonder if there's that many people out there who are in those states and in those areas, business owners, who of course are hungry to get back to work and open up shop. But at the same time, they're seeing the realities that are hard to ignore about, the lack of assurance that exposure would be limited and that you couldn't get it again. And of course, that's what a lot of the states are grappling with now and developing their plans. In Pennsylvania, Governor Wolf just came out with kind of his 3-tiered phase plan for coming back with saying that basically until we're all systems go, that's the point when you're going to have gyms and restaurants and movie theaters open, for everyone to go to. So that's the last part of the plan, and it is for, businesses in general. So it's very limited getting to that point. The first 2 phases are really just a very slightly nuanced difference of each other, which is basically how we're living now, not being able to go out, not going into crowds. I think maybe the difference is instead of, not being out in any group gathering, maybe in the second phase, it could be no more than 25 people in this group. But I think there's still a lot that has to be defined. And when it comes to businesses like restaurants and movie theaters, in those places where they are talking about opening up, they're looking at things like scattered seating, having more space between tables, having capacity limits, only allowing certain number of diners or moviegoers to enter. I thought it was interesting. This one restaurant that was interviewed said that they would use disposable menus, paper menus, disposable glasses and utensils. It sounds almost like they're going to come out in a hazmat suit and just kind of gently pull up the corners of the edge of your table and roll everything into a ball and throw it out, which is maybe not a bad idea. So you see that. I saw where a nail salon was putting up plexiglass shields that come up well over their tables, just allowing a little slot for you to stick your hands through to get them worked on. So I guess businesses are doing whatever they possibly can do within their power to prepare and to try to maintain some level of safety and health consciousness. But I think, we're still looking to the states to provide some bigger guidelines. And of course, the common theme that comes up regularly is having some way of population tracking, or being able to know if people have been exposed, and finding a way to limit that, and just for employees to feel safe going back too. They're going to want to know that. And testing, of course, is the main thing. And there is a test that is supposed to become widely available, a self-administered test that, I keep mentioning, and it's not quite out there. You hear different things as if it is. So I expect that it will be soon before I go into a lot of detail about it, because again, it's still something out there. But I guess the other big thing that we're all concerned about, and we're all hearing a lot about, is the chance of this coming back again. And some health experts are saying, including those in the at the federal level, saying that we can expect this to come back in the fall. And some of us are thinking, well, we hope we'll just even be out of this wave of it by the fall, and that it just doesn't all blend together. But a lot of models indicate that we are probably set to have this happen again in the fall, and that's part of the danger about how aggressively we move back to business as normal. And one of the other things is that, as has been reported many times, there's over 70 companies working on a possible vaccine to protect against the coronavirus. But even with all the help and leniency that they're getting from the FDA and other regulating authorities, it's still, the best case scenario would be at the end of next year, maybe first quarter of 2021. And that's if everything goes right. And, it still has to meet certain threshold requirements for public safety. But right now, there are a couple companies that are already doing human trials that look pretty promising. But the point is that that's not going to be available till we're well into the regular flu season. And, how many are we going to be able to catch at that point? Given if you have to have a certain amount of time that it's in your system to when you're exposed to it in order to be immune. So there's a lot to consider with having businesses getting back to work and opening up, and we just hope that they're making the wise decisions, and it makes sense perhaps in some rural areas where they have not been as impacted, but we're pretty hard pressed to find any area in this country that hasn't been impacted in some way, even if it is in much smaller numbers. It's everywhere. So with that, in our next segment, we're going to talk a little bit more about testing and tracking and even drones. So come back with me after this next commercial and we'll talk about it.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC.
Hi. So in the last segment, I was talking about the character in the movie or the Scooby-Doo episode who's going forward with the gang, with the plan, but is hesitant and saying, I don't know if it's a good idea. And that's what we've been hearing from some business owners and others, residents in other states where they are taking more aggressive steps to get business back to work. And as I said, one of the common things that we're hearing is that people feel a lot more comfortable if there's testing or screening or some way of knowing that they're safe as customers, they're safe as employees, and that we don't set ourselves up to increase the chance that we'll get the second wave sooner than we thought. Or at all. I guess we can be optimistic and hope that we don't get a second wave of it. But testing is that common thread that we've seen and heard about, and tracking. And we've seen that, in other countries, they have been doing some things voluntarily, like in South Korea, for example. Residents there register for an app that's a self-diagnostic app that can help you determine, if you have the symptoms of corona, if you have it. In China, they actually, they've been capturing people's, their facial images and have scans of them. And I don't think this is everywhere in China. It's in certain areas. And they actually have their own system or software to be able to give people ratings as to how likely they are to develop the virus, I guess, based on trends. We're just probably not going to see that kind of thing here in the United States. And nor am I supporting the idea either. But I think there is some feeling that there might be some compromise in privacy, personal privacy, versus the greater good of the health of the overall public. And we're going to have to find that balance. And, if we could all do it voluntarily, that would be great. But the problem is you can't have some people in the population doing it or some people who work for a company doing it and not everyone. If it's not being done universally, then it's just not going to be that effective unless people are staying shut into their homes and are not going to interact with anyone else. But as we've said previously, there are different things in development in terms of tracking. That is, testing. We know that there already are some the tests available. We know that there's some standard ones that the healthcare community is using, and then there are ones that are being considered for much broader distribution for people to do self-testing, and we've mentioned that before. But tracking is another side to this, and that's where we would use data from our phones or perhaps computers to help track symptoms, to help track outbreak. And as I said, Apple and Google have partnered to develop a way for basically to share information across those companies that would help to determine who's sick, who needs treatment, and how to isolate our contacts or people who've been in contact with someone who has the virus. And whether or not that's going to be, widely available, and whether it'll be a voluntary measure to do this, or whether there will be information exchanged without our express permission, that's still not clear how exactly that's going to work. But I know that it's based on Bluetooth technology and being able to automatically connect to certain data centers, data points from other people's cell phones, from other people's Bluetooth technology. So I really did a terrible job of explaining that. That's why I don't work for Apple or Google. So I know Apple, Google, you might as well take me off the recruiting list. Secret's out. But, I guess we all know already how much of our personal information is being tracked by large companies for marketing reasons. And, there are watchdog groups, of course, who are out to protect our information and to look at how we're going to administer some of this tracking technology. I did want to mention, too, I had seen a story where a guy went and got tested for the coronavirus based on some kind of flags or indicators that he saw from his fitness tracker. He was wearing a fitness tracker that shows how much, how his sleep was, how much sleep he got, the quality of sleep. I think it also tracked his heart rate, his activity levels. And when he saw that the numbers sort of reflected what he was generally feeling, an overall malaise, it prompted him to contact his doctor, and that in fact led him to get testing, and he did end up having coronavirus. So he thought that the fitness tracker was a good way to tip him off about it. And it's funny because the company that does Fitbits has been looking at data, at least this was before the virus, so I'm not sure what they're doing now, if anything, in the context of the coronavirus. But at one point, they were looking at data from all their Fitbit users, not by name, not knowing where the data was coming from individually or tracking it to a particular individual, but they were collecting information that would show heart rate, sleep duration, activity level, some of those kinds of things, and looking at this overall data to see what it would show. Now, whether or not they're using that right now, or it should be using it right now to look at where there might be hot spots in the outbreak, it's something to consider. So with that said, and touching on those privacy versus the public good issues, our next segment we're going to talk about drone technology and how it's being used in this fight against the coronavirus. So I'll be back in a moment after this commercial.
the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hi, I'm back. So in this last segment of the podcast, this kind of ties into all the other topics. We talked about getting ready to open up business. We talked about tracking and testing and what it would take for people to feel comfortable to go back out in public again, or for employees to go back to work. And this next segment, which is on drones and drone technology, it seems to be a natural fit for that discussion, or an extension of it, because drones are being used to help identify hotspots for the coronavirus. And it's actually in test right now. From what I understand, it's not an approved, widely used approach. But there was a story that I saw on NBC about drones being used in this small Connecticut town to look at social distancing, whether or not people were keeping the appropriate amount of space between each other. It also can show, I guess it has some thermal indicators. It can show if people have a fever, if they're coughing or sneezing, and otherwise exhibit symptoms that would be consistent with the coronavirus. They use this drone called Dragonfly, which was developed to be able to look at these indicators. And they showed it in the story, what it looks like, and, color coded to be able to show, I guess, temperature and, other symptoms going on. And it was fascinating. I mean, the drones were only about 40 feet above the people that it was surveilling. And it doesn't seem that any of the people that were being surveilled knew that they were, which of course raises a privacy concern. The fact of the matter is that this police force, and they're the ones who are using this technology, the police force has been using drones there since 2016, and they've been using it for traffic and parking, and I guess there's probably a couple other things that they use it for. But this is now taking it to a whole other level. And, while some would say this is what we have technology for, is to help with the greater good and make our lives a little easier in some way, and being able to detect the virus and where there might be contagion, obviously is a good, but you do wonder, what price does it come with? And, it does seem a little strange that this is just a small town where this is being used. Of course, we'd have much more of an issue if it was being tested in a larger city, where they have too many concerns as it is in dealing with the issue, to not have to worry about what these drones are tracking and doing overhead without people knowing. But these drones are being looked at as a way to help the town get more comfortable with reopening businesses. What it showed in the video was how people were spaced apart outside of a store, I guess a takeout store or something, and people were lined up and they could tell. So, I mean, that's kind of interesting. I remember a couple years ago reading an article about someone who got a parking ticket based on a drone being able to see that he had let his meter run out. He hadn't paid, the appropriate amount that he should have, and the drone goes around and takes pictures of license plates and can tell, when somebody has gone past their time limit. And, at that particular time when I read about that, there was all kinds of issues raised about, whether or not that was ethical or that was the right thing to do. So I guess the point is that it has been used to help police and parking authorities, I suppose. And maybe it creates a bigger consciousness for all of us that, what you think, you're getting away with, even if you have symptoms of a virus and you go out somewhere, that, there's somebody watching, and, you're not necessarily going to get away with it. And maybe the point is that if you're not doing anything wrong, then there's nothing to worry about. Still, it does raise the issue, as one critic had called it, function creep. And he described that as when you have something like a technology, like a drone, that's designed for one purpose and then starts to be used for other purposes, other outbreaks or other types of activity. And of course, that's probably at the heart of the matter of and what we fear. But it just raises that issue, because there are a lot of drones out there now being used, and we're probably not even aware. We may be watched right now, and we just don't know. And hopefully, there are those who will make sure that our rights are protected, and that it is truly for a greater good. I guess that when you consider that drones have been used for a long time already in this country and have been used by the military for certain tactical operations, and we've likened this battle right now with the coronavirus as similar to a war that we're all engaged in. And, I suppose we need to use whatever tools we have available that will give us some sort of advantage in this fight, because it's a fight that we can't afford to lose. And with every human life that's lost, of course, we are losing that fight a little bit more every day. But to try to minimize the damage, we're going to have to resort to measures that we might not otherwise feel completely comfortable with. So that's it for my soapbox on that. I'd like to thank you for joining me today in the GSMC Business News Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd really love to hear your thoughts, your comments about the podcast. So if you would, please go to our Twitter or our Facebook page and let us know what you think. We really appreciate it. Maybe you even have ideas for things you'd like to hear in future podcasts. So for now, this is Paula DuPont once again, and I'm signing off. Have a great night.
You've been listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.